Okay, there's a horror game that came out recently, and the longer I spent researching it, the more uncomfortable I got. Not because of the monsters or the jump scares, but because of how well it understands the specific and quiet cruelty that human beings are capable of inflicting on each other and on themselves. Every single location in this game is a place someone returned to in their worst nightmares. Every creature is a feeling that person was never allowed to speak out loud, and by the time you reach the final chapter, you realize the entire experience was never really about horror at all. It was about one person trying to survive their own history. And if that sounds like something you want to dig into, stick around. And if you find yourself somewhere in the story too, which I think a lot of people will, maybe consider subscribing. The channel goes deep on games like this one. The game goes by the name BrokenLore Follow. It's a first-person psychological horror game from an indie developer called Serafini Productions, and it functions as the prequel to their earlier game Unfollow. But you don't need to have played anything before this to feel what it's doing. Follow exists as its own complete nightmare. You play as a young woman named Anne. She wakes up in her childhood home, alone, in the dark, with 3 plates on the dining table and no food, a Christmas tree in the living room with a note on it, a radio nearby, playing the sound of children's voices, children who are making fun of a little girl. And before you've touched a single puzzle, the game has already told you almost everything you need to know about who Anne is and what made her. The home shifts as you move through it. Doors that were open are now sealed. Rooms that shouldn't exist appear at the end of hallways, and somewhere in the darkness, something is following you. Something enormous, something that wears a face you'll eventually recognize. The developers worked with a psychologist named Emanuela Papa to make sure the themes in this game were handled carefully. Because this game doesn't use horror as a decoration, it uses it as the truest possible language for what its history is actually about. Anne's childhood was shaped by 2 forces operating in opposite directions. On one side, there were her peers at school, kids who decided she was an acceptable target and committed to that for years. The bullying Anne endured at Harmony High School is reconstructed across an entire chapter of the game, and it doesn't treat this as backstory. It makes you walk through it. I mean literally. You navigate hallways full of shadow figures. You crawl under furniture just to get from one room to the next. Every instinct is flight. There is nowhere to fight back. That design choice matters, because in a game with no combat system whatsoever, the only thing Anne can ever do is run, hide, or find another way around the thing that's threatening her. She is never allowed to win through force. The game understands that some experiences don't leave you with weapons, they leave you with strategies for survival, and that's it. But the bullying, as devastating as it is, isn't the deepest wound in the story. That belongs to Anne's relationship with her mother. I want to be precise here, because the game is precise about it. Anne's mother isn't a monster in the traditional sense. She's someone with an outsized consuming personality who directed enormous amounts of criticism at her daughter throughout Anne's entire childhood. Anne's weight, her appearance, even her choices. The mother's presence in the game is suffocating in the way that only deeply familiar relationships can be. The kind where the person doing the damage loves you and you know it, and that makes the damage so much harder to name. The creature that pursues Anne most relentlessly in Follow is a manifestation of her mother, not a symbolic stand-in, not an interpretation you have to stretch for. The game builds this into the structure of its horror. You are literally being chased through your own memories by the emotional residue of someone who was supposed to protect you. One of the most unsettling early sequences involves a recipe. Anne has to cook something called heart milk spaghetti to feed a monster that won't let her leave the kitchen. The ingredients are scattered throughout the house. She finds the spaghetti in a toilet, she finds a heart in a closet. The recipe itself is clearly absurd, and yet there's something in that sequence that hits differently. Once you understand what the kitchen represents to Anne, a space where her body and her appetite were constantly scrutinized, the game takes that dynamic and makes it grotesque and literal. You have to perform an act of feeding under threat, with ingredients that shouldn't exist, in a place that never felt safe. That's the level of specificity Follow operates at throughout its 7 chapters. A hospital chapter puts Anne in a ward full of mannequins, where she confronts the medical dimensions of what her body image issues actually cost her. A pool chapter opens when something on the living room TV pulls her into a surreal, weather-themed nightmare. A ritual-style chapter fragments her memories into pixelated VHS distorted environments. deliberately making her past feel like something corrupted and unreliable, like footage that's been degraded by time. And then there's the doll. Anne's childhood doll appears early and stays throughout. It guides her, it speaks to her. The developers made this doll a recurring presence across the entire BrokenLore series. Reassembling doll parts unlocks key story revelations. In Follow, the doll functions as a kind of external conscience, something Anne kept from her childhood that still carries the version of her that existed before everything got complicated. The final chapter is titled In the Belly of the Beast, and the imagery commits completely to that metaphor. The walls pulse, they're organic, their blood, everything whispers. It's as if Anne has finally arrived at the actual center of her own fear. And it turns out, the center of her fear is biological. It breathes, it's alive, and she has to move through it to get out. The game offers 3 endings, and they hinge on 2 choices made at specific points in the story. In Chapter 2, during the school sequence, Anne can choose to let go of her anger toward the people who hurt her, or she can choose revenge. In Chapter 4, the hospital chapter, she faces the same choice regarding her mother, let go or revenge. The good ending comes from releasing both. Anne finds something like peace. The bad ending comes from holding on to both. Anne lets her resentments consume her, and the implication is dark. But there's a third ending, a secret one to be exact. And to access it, you have to find 15 hidden symbols scattered across all 7 chapters of the game. These symbols appear on the bathroom walls, on quaid sides, behind objects you'd pass without thinking, and they're all connected to something called Elysium. Here's where it gets interesting. Elysium, in Greek mythology, is described as a place of perfect happiness after death, a paradise reserved for the heroic and the righteous. In the BrokenLore series, it functions as something else entirely. It's a recurring symbol that connects the games that otherwise seem unrelated. In the very first BrokenLore game, a secret ending tied to the Elysium device reveals that the protagonist has a daughter named Anne, the same Anne whose nightmare will live into it and follow. So these hidden symbols aren't just collectibles, they're pieces of a much larger architecture, and the secret ending they unlock and follow gestures towards something the developers have been building since the beginning of the series. A meta-narrative about why these characters are experiencing these specific horrors, and what it might mean that the suffering feels so structured. One theory that's circulated in the community, and I want to be clear, this is an interpretation, not confirmed law, is that the Elysium framework represents something like therapeutic simulation, a constructed psychological space designed to make people confront their trauma in a way that might lead somewhere. The fact that the same symbols appear across entirely separate stories, pointing toward the same hidden architecture, suggests there's a deliberate hand behind what these characters are experiencing. They aren't just victims of their memories, they might be participants in something. Whether that theory is right or not, it changes the way you read Anne's story. If her nightmare is constructed, if someone or something designed that monster that wears her mother's face, then the question shifts from what happened to Anne to what is Anne being shown and why. And the answer the game seems to suggest is herself. Anne is being shown herself, her choices, her capacity for both release and revenge. The game isn't asking whether her pain is real, it's asking what she wants to do with it. That's the question that stays with you after the credits, because the development team acknowledged that much of Anne's journey was shaped by real personal experiences, specifically by someone named Anna Muraruto, who helped inform the themes the games explore. Follow began development in 2022, and it was actually one of the very first projects conceived alongside the whole BrokenLore universe. The core message, they said, never changed. That matters, because psychological horror built from genuine experiences lands differently than horror built from genre conventions. When a kitchen becomes terrifying because of what eating meant in someone's actual childhood, the metaphor isn't a creative exercise, it's a translation. And that's what I keep returning to when I think about Follow. The most honest thing in the game isn't the most dramatic moment, it's the earlier detail. 3 plates set on a dining table, no food, and the silence where the explanation should be. The game trusts you to feel what that means before it tells you anything, because some things don't need to be explained, they just need to be recognized. If you've ever felt like a monster was following you through your own story, you already know what this game is about.